Twist endings have always been part of horror, but the most effective ones don't rely on shock alone. They reframe the story, punish the characters, and leave the audience with no easy answers. These are 12 horror movies with the most twisted endings, ranked from least to most disturbing. Ranked at number 12, Kill List. In 2011, Kill List marked a turning point for British horror, with Ben Wheatley deliberately blending crime realism and occult horror into a single unsettling structure. The film was made on a modest budget of around $800,000, and Wheatley has said he wanted it to feel grounded and ordinary at first, almost like a kitchen sink crime drama, before letting the tone fracture. The story follows Jay, a former soldier struggling with trauma, money problems, and a failing marriage. His work as a contract killer initially plays out like a stripped-down hitman film, but each job grows stranger in ways that are never explained up front. Victims behave oddly, symbols recur, and conversations hint at something larger moving behind the scenes. Rather than escalating with spectacle, the film tightens its grip by keeping information from both Jay and the audience. One important detail is how Kill List uses performance over exposition. Neil Maskell's portrayal of Jay is intentionally raw and unstable, and the violence is filmed in a blunt, almost documentary style. That choice makes later revelations feel harsher because nothing is stylized or softened, although the end of the film reframes the entire narrative as a controlled ritual rather than a series of bad decisions, which is why Kill List is often cited as one of the most punishing and uncompromising horror endings of the 2000s. Ranked at number 11, Dead Night. Bradford Barrow's Dead Night didn't begin as the film audiences eventually saw. When it first screened at Fantastic Fest in 2017, it was actually titled Apple Cart and structured very differently. The original cut split the story into two halves, one presented like a true crime television reconstruction, the other showing what supposedly really happened in the woods. The final version follows a family trip that ends in violence, but it refuses to settle on a single version of events. Instead, the film shifts perspectives, replaying key moments with subtle changes that alter meaning and tone. A scene that feels grounded and tragic from one angle becomes strange and threatening from another. The audience is left piecing together truth from fragments, rather than being handed a clean explanation. That fractured structure is deliberate. Barreau has explained that the story was built around how fear and memory can reshape events after the fact. The woods become less a physical location and more a mental space where panic fills in the gaps, where logic leaves behind. Behind the scenes, Dead Night was shot partly in Barreau's childhood home and later re-edited after festival feedback, a rare move for an indie horror release. The finished film stands as a reminder that sometimes a movie's most twisted ending begins long before the final scene, during the act of deciding how the story itself should be told. Ranked at number 10, Banshee Chapter. 2013, and Blair Erickson makes his feature debut with Banshee Chapter, a horror mystery that folds real MKUltra history into a straight, suspenseful hunt for answers. Anne Rowland, a journalist, starts looking into the disappearance of her old friend James Hirsch after he records himself taking an experimental drug linked to government tests. The tape is nasty, the audio is worse, and a strange broadcast keeps bleeding into the footage like a signal that should not exist. Anne breaks into James's place, finds a Betamax tape and notes pointing to Project MKUltra, then tracks down Thomas Blackburn, a burned-out counterculture writer played by Ted Levine. The deeper they push, the clearer the pattern gets. DMT-19 is not just a high, it works like an antenna, tuning people into entities hiding behind a phantom radio station. They follow the broadcast into the desert and locate an abandoned facility running the numbers station. Inside is a tank holding the primary source, and the moment Anne tries to destroy it, everything escalates. Even after the lab burns, the threat lingers, because the film's final punch is simple and nasty. Contact is enough to pass it on. Ranked at number 9, Absentia. Released in 2011, Absentia sits quietly at the start of Mike Flanagan's career, and the movie already shows the obsessions he would return to again and again: loss, guilt, and the price of refusing to let go. The story follows Trisha, a pregnant woman finally preparing to declare her husband dead after 7 years missing, and her sister Callie, a recovering addict who drifts back into her life at exactly the wrong moment. Their apartment sits near a neglected pedestrian tunnel, the kind people avoid without thinking about why. Callie notices strange patterns first. Food left near the tunnel vanishes. Objects return in places they shouldn't be. then people who were once missing begin to reappear, broken, starving, terrified, and speaking of being underneath. Trisha's husband is one of them, and his return pulls the film from quiet grief into something far darker. The tunnel isn't haunted in the traditional sense. It operates on rules. Trades are made. Something is always taken in return. Flanagan made the film for about $70,000, much of it raised on Kickstarter, and its success directly led to his later work, proof that sometimes the smallest horror films leave the deepest marks. Ranked at number 8, The Pact. The story circles back to a funeral, and in 2012, that return home becomes the trigger for everything that follows in The Pact, written and directed by Nicholas McCarthy. Annie comes back to her childhood house after her mother's death, already carrying years of resentment, only to find her sister has vanished under strange circumstances. From there, the film slowly turns the house into a puzzle, with locked rooms, missing time, and details that feel deliberately out of place. Instead of leaning hard on jump scares, the film builds tension through routine. Annie sleeps, wakes, checks doors, checks photos, then realizes the house seems to know more about her past than she does. The investigation drifts between police work, psychic help, and Annie's own memories, which are clearly unreliable. What starts as a haunting gradually shifts into something more physical and disturbing, forcing the audience to rethink who or what is actually responsible. The third act is where the film takes a sharp turn, replacing the usual ghost logic with a far uglier human truth tied to family history. That pivot is the reason the ending lands so hard for many viewers. Ranked at number 7, Yellow Brick Road. Released in 2010, Yellow Brick Road arrived quietly and then proceeded to unsettle viewers in ways that were hard to pin down. Directed by Jesse Holland and Andy Mitten, the film is built around a chilling historical mystery. An entire town of 572 people once abandoned their homes and walked into the wilderness, leaving behind only partial remains and unanswered questions. The trail they followed was sealed off for decades, which already gives the story an eerie sense of something deliberately buried. The plot follows a modern research team attempting to retrace that path. These are not reckless explorers, they are cartographers, psychologists, and planners who believe preparation will keep them safe. That belief erodes as strange sounds flood the forest, and tension inside the group begins to spike. Arguments turn violent, people disappear, and the landscape itself feels hostile, as if direction no longer exists in any meaningful way. Instead of escalating with traditional scares, the film leans into confusion and mental collapse. By the time the story reaches its final stretch, logic has fully broken down, replaced by an almost theatrical nightmare that refuses clear answers. Despite mixed reactions from critics and audiences, the film earned Best Film at the New York City Horror Film Festival, a reminder that discomfort and ambiguity can sometimes leave the strongest impression. Ranked at number 6, The Interior. For a quiet Canadian indie released in 2015, The Interior doesn't announce itself as horror right away, and that is very much by design. Directed by Trevor Juris as his debut feature, the film starts in Toronto, following James, an advertising worker who is deeply bored with his routine, his job, and the version of life he feels stuck inside. Quitting everything doesn't bring relief, so he does something more extreme. He leaves the city entirely and heads into the wilderness, convinced that isolation might give him clarity. Once he is camping alone, the tone shifts. Small disturbances creep in. Sounds at night, objects out of place, a distant figure in a red coat that never quite comes close enough to explain itself. The film refuses to clarify whether these moments are external threats or the result of a mind slowly unraveling, and it keeps that uncertainty intact all the way through. The film divided viewers, but Juris later admitted he wanted the confusion to mirror James's own lack of answers, which explains why the story never settles into something comfortable or easily resolved. Ranked at number 5, The Swerve. By the time 2018 rolls into the opening moments of The Swerve, it is already clear this is a film about pressure rather than spectacle. Directed by Dean Kapsalis in his feature debut, the story stays close to Holly, a high school English teacher whose life looks stable on the surface but feels relentlessly hostile underneath. At home, she is dismissed by her husband and overwhelmed by her children. At work, her students tune her out. Even her family treats her like an afterthought. None of this is exaggerated, which is part of why it lands so hard. Instead of pushing toward obvious shocks, the film tracks a slow accumulation of small humiliations and quiet resentments. Holly holds herself together with routine and restraint, until a single decision fractures that balance, and the rest of the film follows the consequences of that break. Azure Sky carries nearly every scene, often saying very little, letting facial tension and body language do most of the work. Visually, the film leans into tight framing and enclosed spaces, reinforcing the sense that Holly has no room to breathe. Although it's screened at horror festivals, many viewers debate its genre, which may explain why it quietly divided audiences while earning praise for Sky's performance rather than box office attention. Ranked at number 4, The Alchemist Cookbook. Joel Potrykus released The Alchemist Cookbook in 2016, and it immediately announced itself as a film that plays by its own rules. Set almost entirely around an abandoned trailer deep in the woods, the story follows Sean, a withdrawn man who has cut himself off from normal life while attempting strange alchemical experiments. His only real connection to the outside world is his friend Cortez, who brings supplies and checks in on him, though even that fragile link begins to strain. The film moves in fragments rather than clean plot beats. Sean's experiments never fully explain themselves, and that uncertainty bleeds into his mental state. He talks about bargains, rituals, and unseen forces, while everyday details like medication, food, and isolation quietly push him closer to collapse. Potrykus keeps the camera close and patient, letting long stretches of silence do the work instead of dialogue or spectacle. As Sean's behavior grows more erratic, the film refuses to clarify whether something supernatural is happening or whether everything is unfolding inside his head. That ambiguity is deliberate, and it never resolves into providing answers. Shot with a tiny cast and minimal locations, the entire film leans on atmosphere rather than budget, proving how far a stripped-down idea can go when it commits fully to its mood. Ranked at number 3, The Devil's Candy. Heavy guitars, Texas dust, and a bad idea of a fresh start sit at the center of this film, which came out in 2015 under the direction of Sean Byrne, the same filmmaker behind The Loved Ones. Jesse Hellman, a struggling painter, moves his family into a remote house, hoping for peace and creative focus, but the place comes with a history that refuses to stay buried. Almost immediately, Jesse's behavior shifts. His art grows darker, his temper shortens, and his fixation on violent imagery begins to worry everyone around him. Running parallel to Jesse's slow unraveling is Ray Smiley, the unstable son of the home's previous owners. Ray drifts in and out of the story like a bad omen, tied to loud music, raw aggression, and a sense that something already went very wrong in this house long before the Hellmans arrived. The film constantly toys with possession imagery, religious symbolism, and the idea of artistic obsession as a gateway to something destructive without ever fully spelling out how much of it is supernatural and how much is human collapse. Interestingly, despite its heavy metal branding and occult hints, the film leans more towards psychological breakdown than outright demonology. It premiered at Toronto International Film Festival and gained attention largely because viewers were split on whether it promised more than it delivered, which makes it a frequent topic of debate among modern horror fans. Ranked at number 2, The Ghoul. A UK indie psychological puzzle released in 2016, this film opens under the disguise of a grounded crime procedural and quietly pulls the floor out from under it. Chris appears to be a police detective investigating a brutal double murder, using therapy sessions as a cover to get close to a suspect. That premise feels solid enough to trust, which is exactly why the film's slow corruption of it works so well. As Chris embeds himself deeper into therapy, details begin slipping. His memories contradict each other. His relationships feel half-imagined. A former academic crush resurfaces in unsettling ways, and the suspect he is meant to be tracking may be nothing more than another patient. What looked like an undercover operation starts to resemble a coping fantasy, constructed by a man collapsing under untreated depression and obsession. Produced with Ben Wheatley as executive producer, the film deliberately refuses to confirm which layer of reality is true. Some viewers find that maddening, others find it exhilarating. Either way, it is designed to leave you questioning whether you watched a mystery being solved or a mind inventing one to survive. Ranked at number 1, The Last Exorcism, Part 2. Released in 2013, this sequel picks up after catastrophe rather than possession. Nell Sweetser survives the inferno that ended the first film and is relocated to New Orleans, where the horror initially shifts gears. Instead of priests and rituals, the storytelling experience of a young woman encountering normal life for the first time. A halfway house, a motel job, a tentative romance, all of it framed as fragile stability earned after trauma. that calm never lasts. Hallucinations creep in. Familiar symbol answers the question of survival, but not the one of necessity. And that wraps up this list. If there's one takeaway here, it's that horror doesn't always need monsters in plain sight. Films like The Ghoul or The Alchemist cookbook linger because they mess with perception, identity, and reality itself, while something like The Last Exorcism, Part 2, shows how fragile those ideas can be when familiarity takes over. Well, if you enjoyed this breakdown, hit the like button, drop your favorite slow burn or psychologically unsettling horror in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.